Okay, here we are at the conference. Get ready to start. Grab a seat, share, like, subscribe. Bye, guys.
Come on in, guys. Come grab a seat. I was just telling Beth, and honestly, I really don't know exactly what the open source project is. The name kind of gives me a little bit of an idea. So we just met the other day. I just want to thank you for coming and sharing with us.
Cool, thanks. Awesome for having me today. I usually have like slides and have prepared a bunch of stuff, but I didn't really know what to expect. So I'm going a little bit off the cuff, but sounds like after. And I run the Open Cannabis Project. I'm also from Atlanta, Georgia, initially, so I should probably say y'all throughout this presentation. I know I'm on the West Coast, and that's a little bit different. But so Open Cannabis Project. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about what we do and have done. And everyone loves open source in theory, but today, because I love all of y'all and I'm here to work for all of you, I want to share a little bit about sort of the dark side of open source. So we'll get to that in a minute. And because we have some decisions to make as a community because of this, and it's a big deal. Open Cannabis Project was initially a project out of Phylos Bioscience, and the idea was to collect and share as much data about cannabis genetics in the public domain as possible, collect data from a bunch of labs, and use that information as documentation of prior art, which is actually a really great thing if you're somebody who's like, I'm really afraid of some of these overbroad patents that are coming out. I don't really, I don't want for my cannabis and my work to get caught up in these, overbroad patents potentially. Public domain documentation and prior art documentation is a great way to do that, and so they decided to start this project sharing data. In the 2 years that it was really run at Phylos, there were a couple issues. One was that, for some reason they weren't letting any of their competitors share their data, and I don't know if that was just negligence or just it was a side project, whatever. But the truth of the matter is that it wasn't a very open project. And then there were also complaints about there being people using, Phylos using Open Cannabis Project as a way to sell more genetic testing kits. I didn't really know anything about any of this stuff. When I got involved in 2017. I got hired both as a science writer and also for Phylos, and also to separate out Open Cannabis Project and make it into an independent nonprofit. To give you a little bit of background about me, before getting involved in cannabis, I've been a technical writer, I've been a curriculum writer. I ran a nonprofit called Map Time, which, if you can imagine, there are a bunch of nerds who like to get together and learn about open source map making. Apparently, so many nerds are into this that we had 60 chapters all over the world at our height. So I'm really interested in educating communities, people coming together, all of that kind of stuff. And so, and when I ran Map Time, I was working for another company. And the company was like, oh, cool, I really like your nonprofit. By the way, you signed a work for hire contract and we own it. And I was like, whoa, okay. I didn't realize that I signed away my rights to something that I didn't even know that I was gonna invent, And so, I had this bit of an intellectual property dispute with this company for about 2 years. Where I'm like, cool, now I'm kind of under their finger, I don't know what's happening. And so when Phylos was like, hey, we have this nonprofit and we actually want to separate it from our company, I was like, oh my gosh, this is great. You're actually trying to do the right thing here and make this thing independent. You're not trying to own something you shouldn't be owning. This is cool. I'll get involved. And I love open data and I've been teaching about stuff, so hooray. So since November of 2017, we've been an independent nonprofit and we have acted independently. And part of what I've done with the project in that time frame has been to, one, rebuild our database so that it focuses not only on genetic data, but really we've been focusing our efforts on chemical data. From a prior art documentation standpoint, the National Center for Biotechnology Information, the NCBI, they are built to house genetic data after cold calling a number of patent officers, which is super fun if you're ever interested. They love getting cold calls, they don't. Asking them about what do you look for prior art, they said NCBI. So great, so people who are interested in making sure that their data is seen by the USPTO, send it to NCBI, groovy. So I'm not gonna worry, because I have limited resources, I'm not gonna worry about genetic data, I'm gonna look at chemical data. And so for much of this past year, we've been really building out the chemical data portion of our database. and making it so that we can see the chemical profiles, like the terpene ratios, cannabinoid ratios, etc. And which is great because one, there is, we all know that there's like a lot of things that have the same strain name, might have like different chemical properties when they get to the shelf, and consumers need to know that, and we all need to look at that stuff and ask questions about like, okay, do you want to think about naming standards? Do you want to think about labeling standards? If there really is 4 basic genetic categories of cannabis, how can we start putting this open data together with that to sort of like figure this stuff out? So all of that has been really great. Meanwhile, on the flip side, it's been really interesting because I started working on this project, and I every once in a while get like a Twitter message that's like, "Open Cannabis Project is a scam," and I'm like, I literally have no idea what this is about. Why is this happening? What is going on? And people, it turns out, were pretty mad at Phylos for some reason I couldn't quite figure out for a long time. And because they thought that my project was still part of Phylos, they were mad at me, which was a really interesting thing that I've never been a part of. And I recently figured out, I think, what the issue is. And part of that really has to do with what we think about when we think about open source and what we think it means, and some of the realities of open source. So open source and open information in general is awesome. I think that the world would be so much better if we had public resources available to everybody so that everyone can learn, everyone has the same information, and we can, and really in the true spirit of open source, the idea is that, everybody has data, but everybody has information, and because everybody's sharing information, everybody's able to innovate. And when everybody's able to innovate, suddenly it's not just these big companies who are innovating, it's all of you. And that's really the way that true open source is supposed to work. But as we know, we don't live in a world where there's an even playing field. Some people do have access to things that make them more able to innovate, and others less so. Like Kevin was mentioning earlier, doing analytical, marker-assisted breeding is really cool, but you need 10 years and a team and a ton of money to be able to do that. And the people in this room individually probably don't necessarily have those kinds of resources. I don't have those resources for sure. Which is another reason why I think coming together under a collective model, a cooperative model, is a really great thing for us to be considering and looking at right now as a community. So, so the playing field isn't even, and so there's this thing that I've been talking about with people this year when it comes to open source, and they're like, man, I really love open data. I just don't want certain people to be able to get the data. I want you to have the data, and I want my friends to have the data, but I don't want Big Pharma to get the data.
Big Pharma.
Huh?
Big Pharma.
Big Pharma, yeah, exactly. I don't want Big Pharma to get the data. I have some shitty news. Open source means that Big Pharma can get your data. We can shift that. I love open source. My goal as a human, and my calling as a human, is to serve this community. If that's not something that you want, I'm really interested in rethinking what we mean when we say open source and redefining what that means. Because we can redefine open source so that it's open between this group of people and not with Big Pharma. We can redefine open source so that we are sharing with the people that we want to share with, and we are requiring that they are using our information in a way that is also sharing with the public. So cool, if Big Pharma wants to use this open data set and we have a shared license, then they also have to share everything that they make with it. The problem is that we don't necessarily have a great way to enforce that, which, just from a legal perspective, causes us to look, it means that we have to really look at some of this stuff in a more critical way. So, the other thing that's a piece of that, and this is what I wanted to comment on when Kevin was talking, and I'm so grateful that Kevin is here, and I have so many questions for him individually, and he probably, now that I'm saying all of this pretty publicly, he'll have an idea of what I want to talk to him about. CRISPR and Cas9 is something, so CRISPR, from what I understand, is something that removes a piece of genetic sequence from something, and Cas9 is the mechanism that puts it back in. Is there anyone in here who can verify that for me? Yes, that's how it works, okay. And so one of the issues with having open genetic data in the era of CRISPR and Cas9 is that if you never want for your genetic material to be used in some kind of like biotechnology experiment, if for whatever reason that's not something that you're into, you might not want to share your genetic data. As an open data nonprofit, that's kind of a challenging thing to say, but it's also the truth. And it's also why we've been very slow to collect data this year, because I've been asking myself these kinds of questions, and I've been asking it of my board. And I'm now here really to talk to all of you about it, because I want to make sure that whatever I'm designing, whatever I'm building, and whatever we're building it for you first and foremost. So, you know, the other piece of it that's been a bit of a challenge, and this is sort of having to think about these things from the perspective, and right now I'm really talking about data. I'm not, and data, just to be clear, so data falls under, data is not covered by copyright. Data is something that you own. You have data ownership. And so that falls under like one set of rules. Intellectual property, like when we're talking about your plants and the actual genetic material, kind of fall under a different set of rules. And part of the challenge is that when we're talking about open source, which was really based on copyrightable materials, we have some rules that are built on one rule set that kind of apply to property and that kind of apply to patentable subject matter. But there are some limitations that are very technical, and to be honest, that I haven't fully figured out. I'm looking forward to talking with many more lawyers to help me figure all of this out. So, you know, but the other piece of it too is that, you know, when we talk about so the way to protect your material from patents, right? There's many ways to do it, but one way to do it is to document your information publicly and to put that in the public domain. There's a couple of challenges around that are important to address. One is that from the perspective of these big companies that are right across the street, is that when things are in the public domain, they have no value. They have no monetary value. They're in the public domain. They're interested, and I get emails from people all the time who are like, oh my gosh, I want to work with you on mapping the public domain so that I can make sure that I'm getting, you know, that I can patent my genes and my strains. And, you know, that to some degree, this is another thing that we're talking about, that's kind of fine, right? Because the truth is that patents in and of themselves aren't bad. It's how they're used and how they're employed that is shitty. And it's the fact that some people have access to resources that can help them get patents, and some people don't. That makes it shitty. It's, you know, the idea was that when patenting first came out, the whole idea was like, we're going to help inventors protect their work by giving them a 20-year monopoly, and that's fine, except that now we have this system where it's like not just the first to invent, but it's the first inventor to file, and so, you know, whoever gets the patent in first automatically gets a priority, and so like that raises major questions around like, okay, well, who actually invented what, and does that matter within the current patent system? At least in the US, it doesn't. I'm happy to say that it seems like Canada is far more restrictive and sensitive, and I think uses a lot more logic when it comes to thinking through patentable stuff based on what I've seen. So, but anyway, so mapping the public domain has one problem, which is that, you know, when you put something in the public domain from the perspective of someone who is seeking value from their work, like, oh, your stuff is in the public domain, I don't care about it. Like, I want the new shiny stuff so that I can get patents on it, so that I can have better valuation for my company, or, you know, you can have better valuation for your company, which I'm trying to require. And then the other, where's the other note? The other challenge with documenting things publicly that's specific to cannabis is that, you know, and really specific, and like this is true for getting any kind of intellectual property protection, is that, you know, you absolutely can accidentally incriminate yourself through getting public, you know, through documenting your stuff publicly. And so as a nonprofit whose mission has been to document this stuff publicly, that's really hard. We anonymize everything. We specifically ask for, please don't send me your farm name or your actual name, because if we are an open data set and anyone can use that data for any purpose, the last thing I want is for someone to use that as a way to like basically go after people. So, you know, that's really a big part of this. And, you know, so I've been really working this year on trying to figure out what the system is, and also through, you know, figuring out an ethical relationship with Phylos, which is the company that brought us here. And I'll probably have more that I can say about that publicly in a few weeks. But right now, the point is that what I want to make sure is that you have the information that you need to make wise decisions from an intellectual property perspective when it comes to both your data and how your data is being used, because your data is valuable. And when we give it away really easily, and which is something that we do when we sign terms and conditions without reading them, and like we give our data to Facebook. What we're doing is we are disarming ourselves at a moment when like a big, scary, like military force is like kind of coming in. We're saying it's cool, we want to share everything, and therefore our stuff has no data. And then these other companies come in and think, great, I'm just going to take that and use it for my benefit. And that's really challenging. And so what I'm interested in, and this is another thing I never thought I'd say going into this, is like, I believe in empowering this community and in giving people the tools that they, like, basically, if we have to use the master's tools to dismantle the master's house and to do so collectively, like, this is the world that we're living in. And I don't think that, like, I believe in our ideals, and I also want to make sure that we're being really pragmatic and really smart about how we're sharing our information. Like, I really love that Kevin even brought up, like, hey, so you've got this like really special thing, maybe keep it secret for a little bit. Trade secret law is law that can protect you and help you protect your work. And at the same time, if you use what is working on the market and maybe something that's not that special, but hold something that's special close to you. And also be careful about who you share your seeds with. One of the questions that I have, so who here has heard of Strainly? Strainly.io? I love Strainly, and I love everything that they do, and I think that Alan's approach to open source and open genetics is probably the best that there is. And he's a big proponent of people saving their seeds, saving your genetics, and like doing sort of like at-home documentation. I think that that's super great. It's not as helpful from a prior art documentation perspective, but it is helpful from a genetic preservation perspective, which is something that I'm also really interested in. And so, along those lines, Strainly has also put together something called an open cannabis license, which is great. It's a license for, that basically says that like any seed that you share or sell with another person, they have to then, share it or sell it in a similar manner. So basically, all of this stuff is open source, and therefore it needs to remain open source, and it can stay sort of within this open source like sort of system. One of the challenges that we face is that we don't have a great way to track that. Like, when it comes to copyright and open source, like if someone takes my image, let's say I took this really cute picture of Josh and Kelly, and then I put it on the internet, and then someone decides that they're going to take that picture and do kind of a shepherd fairy thing with it, and now they're selling it as artwork. Well, it's not going to be hard for me using image searches to figure out, but like, wait a second, that's my image, you used my image, and now I can sue you for copyright infringement if I haven't put it fully in the public domain. When it comes to tracing where your plants go once you've bred them, I mean, does anyone know about like some technology that lets you do that just yet? Because like I haven't heard of it. And so this is where these things, even though there are like licenses and legal frameworks and all of that stuff, we have to really think carefully about how we're sharing our genetics, who we're sharing our genetics with, and who we're sharing our information with as we're going through this process of prior art documentation, so that we can help to protect ourselves. So anyway, that is the most of what I wanted to say to all of y'all. The work that we've done so far has really been about, collecting data and doing documentation. And there is so much work that needs to happen around genetic preservation, around sharing resources with the right people, and really thinking through clever legal frameworks that help give this group of people specifically the power to fight back and to protect ourselves in this world. And I'm looking very forward to helping with that going forward. Thank you. Oh, you can find me at opencannabisproject.org. You can email me info@opencannabisproject.org or Beth@opencannabisproject.org. It all comes to me. And on Instagram at opencannabisproject. And I see some people have questions. Do I have a moment for some? Yeah? Okay.
So I have a question for you, and I've asked this to a lot of people that are thinking about patenting strains and stuff. So traditionally in agriculture, you have to do like an F7 before you can actually patent that cultivar in other plants. What do you think is the proper level of lineage? What F5, F7, F8? What should cannabis be held to before it's a patentable strain?
I wish I had an answer to that question. That's a better question. I think that those are the kinds of questions that, you know, one of the things I should also say is that I'm trained as a participatory designer. And my method of training and my method of design is working with communities to find the answer. And I would say that the people who need to find the answer to that question is a combination of cannabis breeders and patent lawyers coming together to figure it out. Yeah, and I'm sure that the rules are going to be different in Canada than they are in the US.
Can I add to that? Maybe we use the science to help do that too.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, we say, hey, let's test in this, and like maybe it's a BS, and you got to back cost so much to demonstrate, you know, that much of the origin material. You know, I don't know, but that might be some.
Patent lawyers are going to require age to stabilization, selecting for specific traits, and in the folial lines, the inbred lines, you have like greater than 60 or greater than 80% expression of those recessive traits. So there's a lot of work that most breeders aren't actually doing that will come to fruition as we start having to apply for those patents to protect them. But ultimately, the more we keep it open source, the less we have to worry about those lines getting taken by the guys next door.
I think that that's true, and I think that, you know, and I should all, the other thing I have to say is I'm not a lawyer. I work with lawyers, but I'm not a lawyer, and so nothing I can say can be taken as legal advice. Shoot, I forgot what I was going to say. But I think that, you know, based on the things that I'm learning from people who are going down the route of doing proprietary genetics is, you know, granted, one of the larger patents, patent families one of the broader patent families that is out there, with some questions about whether or not it's truly overbroad and, you know, infringe on the public domain, really focus on like the terpene quantities and the cannabinoid quantities and like what that ratio really is as part of their patent. And then, you know, they make claims on similar plants and any derivative product. From what I understand, you know, where a lot of the patenting is going has to do with mold, you know, resistance to molds, you know, resistance to drought, and some of these other, you know, these other characteristics that don't necessarily have to do with the cannabinoid and terpene ratio. And then, you know, there are these questions that are coming up around sufficient enablement, and sufficient enablement basically means, you know, for any given patent, the idea is that, you know, a person of an ordinary skill level should be able to take the information in the patent and then reproduce the thing. When it comes to plants and some of the patents and the patent applications that we've seen, you know, those methods of production might not actually be included along with the information about the plants. And so, you know, there's this, you know, ongoing sort of debate that, you know, will get played out in courtrooms because that's how this stuff gets decided. Around whether or not just talking about the characteristics of the plant is actually enough to, if that's actually enough to say that like that is like this plant is, you know, this plant has X or Y terpene profile, great, but as we all know, like if you take that one plant that did super well in the cold and rainy region and then you put it into like some like desert or like really dry conditions, it's not going to do well. So like, so there's these questions about enablement for the plants. And coming back to prior art and prior art documentation, you know, in addition to, you know, what we really do is collect and anonymize, you know, lab results right now. And I think that there is a lot more work to be done around this documentation. The other piece that's important to know is that when, you know, as we look at the cannabis plant patents that are coming out there, most of the ones that we actually should be worried about are not necessarily patents on the plants themselves, but they're patents on the uses of specific cannabinoids. You know, so for example, the 920 patent, which was a GW Pharma patent, just got partially rejected because claims 1 and 2 basically were like using 400 milligrams of CBD to treat epilepsy, and it's like, well, that is really broad and obvious, you know what I mean? And so the patent office actually did reject that claim in a similar one. But there are all of these other claims that are still in there that are questionable. Yes?
We talked yesterday and you kind of brought up the difference between plant patents for genetic purpose and utility patents, I believe. And that's also something that's kind of stewing in my brain is that, like, these plants, I mean, they're really smart. They'll protect themselves, change genetically as they will. You know, there's going to be a lot of nuanced difficulties that exist there, but the relationship we have with the plants
the way that we use the plants in our agricultural practice, is that something that can fall under like utility patents to ensure that that relationship always exists?
So yes and no. So to speak to that, the difference between a plant patent and a utility patent, and plant patents are only, I think, available in the United States, and I think, I'm not sure. This is where I wish I had more Canadian lawyer friends so that they could speak to this. But in the US, we have plant patents and we have utility patents. Plant patents are specific to a single plant and all of their clones. That's it. It's actually really narrow, and there are, as far as I'm concerned, I have very few ethical questions about plant patents, because it's cool, you're just saying that you invented your one super unique strain, groovy. The issues that I have with that have to do with the lack of prior art, which is another thing. Utility patents, though, which, I have had many debates with many lawyers about whether or not they can be ethical, and some say yes, some say no. But the truth is that utility patents are meant to cover any number of things. So it could be a mechanical process, it could be a state-of-the-art mop, it could be a cannabis plant, it could be anything. When it comes to the practices that we've been doing, when I say we, I mean this group of people. I'm actually a really terrible farmer, which is why I really like hanging out with you guys, because I'm you guys really as far as I'm concerned, literally farming and working with the earth is making magic, and it is one of the holiest, awesomest things that humans can do on the planet. And those practices are really old. They're very old, and old practices are, 2,000-year-old practices are too old for the patent office. And part of the issue that we have is that which just gets into a whole other thing. There's a differentiation between what the patent office considers prior art and what might be community knowledge, in sort of an underground or old school or traditional model. So, what is likely the best option for things like regenerative farming practices is to document the hell out of it, and to get it out there and to make that piece of it really public. And then if you have some trade secrets and you want to keep a secret, that's great. But really, that's how we keep patents off of this. The other thing, I'm glad that you brought that up, because the other thing that I find really fascinating, and Kelly and Josh and I were just talking about this, and I got this information from Jesse Dodd, so I should give him credit. But so Forbes just a couple days ago was hey, here are 10 trends to watch in food and drug area. Number 3 was regenerative agriculture, okay, which is great. And also, if you don't think that those people are not going to try and co-opt the word regenerative in a way that suits their corporate purposes, we need to draw a line in the sand about this. The reason that we have a specific definition of what open source is because there's an organization called the Open Source Initiative, and their one job is to maintain the definition of open source and to call out people when they are not doing things in a truly open source way. I'm not saying that we need a regenerative organic cannabis initiative. There are already a lot of really great organizations around there, but we need to be very vigilant about making sure that when we talk about regenerative cannabis, we're talking about a very specific thing, and that its uses in ways that don't fit that model are not okay. And this is where things like trademarks, defensive documentation, and other kinds of business tools are really going to be important for this this group of people, and why I'm if I had $1 gajillion, I would give you all just lawyers. I would just because these are lawyers, and they are, part of the reason why I love working with them is because they understand this, and the ones that I get to work with really actually care about this community a lot and want to make sure that you're protected. Some of them are also just out to make lots of money, but I don't hang out with them very often. Yeah. All right, go ahead.
Do you think Appalachians, like in California, we have that whole initiative going, do you think Appalachians can help secure some of these practices, like say the DEMPIR certification process, or what that means, could be brought into an appellation and then protected through the government?
Sure. So I definitely think that I absolutely do think that there is room for those two things to work together. Appellations of origin means a really specific thing. Appellations of origin means that if you're using a name like Humboldt or Mendocino or BC or whatever, like that you're like that you're using that name of that product in connection with a specific region, and you know that is true for any product, right? And so it could be your flower, it could be your extract, it could be whatever. So I do think though that if we are talking about terroir and we're talking about soil and we're talking about making sure that we're maintaining those things, if y'all already have like super fresh, awesome, amazing soil with all kinds of fun microbes in it and stuff, like, you know, that might be a part of the process. But ultimately that's really for the community to decide, and the folks who are working on the appellation sort of project to decide, because these two things go hand in hand, but they're also really different. Yes?
So there are large data sets in Canada that exist, obviously because of the legal process and because companies are collecting them, but that data can't ever go to the US. So would there be any way for you guys to interact with data sets that are sort of geographically located because of regulatory concerns? Because obviously we can't send any data to the US because same reason we can't process credit cards for cannabis through the US. It was always problematic because federal offense. So. Right.
That's a good question. I mean, we're set up to take data from anywhere and we don't really care. But also, you know what's great about open source projects is that you can fork them. And then you can have an open cannabis project or open THC. Who is Antonio from Open THC here? No. He's also doing a really awesome data project that's making data public. But you know, it really is possible to, if there's not a project that's doing this in Canada, and for whatever regulatory reasons, Open Cannabis Project can't do it because we're based in Portland, then there's absolutely no reason that there ought not to be a similar organization that's helping to make this data public. You know, because this is another thing that I think that like consumers need and are interested in, and if we want to help educate consumers about where good quality cannabis comes from, then it's a big part of the equation to make that information available.
And food.
And food, yeah, totally, and food. All right, anything else?
Thank you.
Thanks, y'all. Thank you.
I was just going to say, like, when we went to Humboldt last year, it was my first time there, and it was maybe sort of as the beginning, as the farmers were seeing, you know, how hard this was going to be, and how we're, you know, all the stuff we're talking about, how we're going to have to solve these problems, and it was just really clear to Leighton and I that that's where, you know, we needed to kind of shift this, whatever this conference is. You know, we started it to be about education and to get into the details of how to organically farm, but to make it a little bit more of a tool. And we didn't quite get there coming up to Canada. We ran into a lot of things, but some of the stuff we want to work on is providing tools. So we talked about working with folks to get cheap ass brewers that are clean and will work and don't have a bunch of metal and extra pumps. Different things like that. So we posted a raffle, and I'm just kind of talking about it to let you guys know the stuff that we're working on, and talking with Josh and Kelly, like, this coming together thing is real, and it's really how we're going to survive. And I just want to encourage us all to like stay connected. I'm going to try to find some connectivity through our website and this community that we're doing here. I'm going to struggle through how to figure that out. I'm not an activist. I'm not an organizer. I'm a farmer. But you know, just to throw that out there, and just to let you guys know that we do this for love. Like, we don't make any money. We lost money last year. We want to do it again. We want to keep like morphing this into something that's helpful for people, but I don't throw that out for any pity or anything, just to say, like, help us get the word out. And that's why we made these things. We're trying to make some money to pay some stuff back. You know, we make 20 bucks on these, we make 30 bucks on these. They're just simple hats. We didn't make them with the brand, we just made them with the concept, thinking that, you know, everybody can wear this. If you're down with regenerative organic cannabis, you know, or just regenerative whatever, like, so, yeah, these are on the website. From the farthest. Who thinks that's Connecticut. Australian. Hawaii. Where you come from, bro? Oahu. Here you go, man. So, Josh and Kelly, when's your talk at?
At 1:50.
So, should we try to cram you in now or later, which is best?
I mean, I can just do it too.
let's go now. Kevin, do you want to come up and talk about Josh and Kelly? All right. Josh and Kelly, Dragonfly Earth Medicine, and Kevin, go freeze.
All right, guys. These guys are awesome. We got to sesh with them the other night. It was amazing. Amazing. They've got amazing flower. Got to smoke it. Got to smell it. It's cool. Okay, I'm just going to leave the camera recording, I guess. We're back on. I thought I lost connection for a minute. Okay. I'm going to try and move over and get a better spot. Over here. Is that all right? Oh, I can move out way like yeah.
We gotta get them going. I gotta get it faster.
Yes, yes, everyone. Give it up to Kevin. Give it up to Kevin.
Awesome, thank you so much. This is we call it like a breeder expose. And really what this is we call it like a breeder expose. And really what it's about is a chance for some individuals that do their own work to talk about what they do. So this isn't probing, it's just a conversation. And it allowed them to be able to say, you know, what motivated us, what drove us, who inspired us, who still inspires us, who are we trying to inspire, what are the directions we're trying to go, what are the things we wish we had known, what are the things we still don't know. And then what it does, it lets us all kind of benefit from the experience of each other so we can take this and move forward. And with that, I'm going to pass the mic.
Thank you. Yes. So big love to Kevin. Everything you're doing is so amazing. And we got to go down and check out his dispensary and his new facility that he's starting down in the One Log down in Piercy, and it was really amazing. And really appreciate everything Kevin's doing and all the knowledge. So big up. Yeah, we came up here, like we said yesterday, 20 years ago to British Columbia, and so we've been also moving herb for, you know, our whole adult life and working in the underground and seeing plants and seeing farms and organic farms. Our whole entire existence has been about genetics and farms and organic farming and moving them from one place to another and hooking up people. So we're really, really passionate about it. And when we came up here, we started looking at all these clones and genetics that were coming out of Oregon and California. We're up here in British Columbia. There was a whole sect of people that came up from, you know, the draft in British Columbia. There was a whole sect of people that came up from, you know, the draft dodgers, and they kept a lot of genetics. We know that the coast here has amazing genetics here. The Gulf Islands, the Laskedes, the Mighty Mites. We came up here and big up to the Coast family.
I've never heard someone talk about Laskedi.
Exactly. Yeah, well, you know, there are roots up here, and let's give it up. You know, the islands are a big one, and so are the Kootenays. over in the Nelson area, and that's where we went, was the mountain zone. So there's the sea zone and the mountain zone. And certain genetics work better at the coast and certain genetics work best in the mountains. We live at 2,500 feet at the 50th parallel. So we're bringing up genetics from California, Oregon, getting stuff from British Columbia. And we're basically, like Kevin was saying, we're testing them all outdoors. We've been making genetics this whole time. We were originally breeding outdoor genetics because that's what we were working with most. And then all these heady, crazy, terpy, drippy, trichome strains started coming. We're just like, we want to grow these. We want to grow these outside and see what they do. So our whole genetic process was just, do they work up here? We've been, for the last 20 years, just essentially outdoor, organic, regenerative, biologically sifting what works up here. We've been checking molds. We would never take seeds or clones from something that was just melting in our environment. And we have an incredibly hard environment. I mean, our September comes in like a bomb, amazing thing, you know, and it takes stuff out. So we've had a great opportunity to really see genetics, and we plant seeds, you know, sometimes 1,000 seeds and see what they all do. So we've been able to see a lot of different genetics. One of the best ones that we came up with was Zelly's Gift, and that's something that's been going around British Columbia and down in California, West Coast, Oregon, and beyond. It's in South Africa. It's all over the place now. And it's a Jack Herrera mother and an 840 and Afgoo male with purple tie in it and super lemon haze and a Hawaiian godbud. So it's a Hawaiian, Oregon, you know, mixture. And and it makes really amazing lemony, limony terpenes. And we know that myrcene is something that's in a lot of the cannabis, and really we should kind of move beyond the myrcene and look into the limonene. So that was really important to us. So also the Temple Spice is another one, and it has the Royal Kush in it, and it's an amazing smell, amazing terpenes, very resistant, nice colors. And you know, we are not the headiest of hash makers, but we have been making hash all these, you know, since '99, and we've been testing the hash and seeing what the strains do. So I think that we have made a lot of headway for what works in British Columbia. We have given out a lot of seeds. We've made tons of seeds up here. Craig grew some of our seeds out. We generally don't do a lot of trellising with our plants. The wind blows, the rains come. We don't water a lot at the end of the season, and we really get a chance to see what works up here. So when we have given those seeds out to go back down south, it's almost like a proving grounds up here, like when you're with natural farming and you're gonna get IMOs, you might want to get them higher in elevation because they're more survivor genetics for your soil. Well, I think some of our strains that we've been able to develop on our property are survivors. And I think Craig might say, you know, there was no trellising needed down where he was. And that's a beautiful thing. So we've also had people grow our strains out indoors. And we don't ever allow people to grow our stuff with chemicals. It happens though, which sucks. But they'll tell us, you know, it didn't do very well. And then all of a sudden I'm like, I'm moving into these living soils, and all of a sudden this plant that I've been having all these problems with completely blossomed into this amazing thing, and now it's my favorite strain that I have. And I'm like, wow, and Kevin touched on this earlier. I mean, it's a beautiful, real thing. And I'll pass the mic on, but I think the most important thing, and one of the things that really stands out to me, is cannabis is adaptogenic, but it's also like, it's a fractal medicine. It's fractal. It fractals. It does everything different. It's like it can't be controlled. The best scientists in the world are racking their brain around this plant, trying to make sense of it, trying to control it, trying to isolate it, and the brilliant minds just come back to ground zero, which is, it's all about the entourage effect. It's all about the diversity. So let's just stick to our guns, or stick to our morals and values, and realize that, you know, we're not behind anything. You know, what we're doing is the right thing, and we are the commodity. And the fact that we have these genetics, you know, don't sell yourself short when it comes to, you know, bonding with an LP or someone that's going to move your stuff. And we've all talked about working together. And so genetics is probably one of our, along with soil building and stuff, is one of our most important things we have. And the big dogs, they need them. I mean, they basically, essentially, they're nothing without them. And so let's continue to save seeds, share seeds, climatize them, and bond with some type of lab that's going to help us analyze them. Because, you know, a feeling is extremely important, and it's one part of the process. So strains, in a way, are almost less of a thing now when you start looking at the extraction potentials and the nutraceutical aspect of things and stuff. So labs, intuition, and community are the three things that we think really bring genetics forward. And I'll move it on to Kelly. Blessings.
Well, Josh covered a little bit of our story, but my story started in 1989. I went up to Alaska to see what I could find. And I found a Johnny Appleseed, who was the originator of the Alaska Thunderfuck. And I found 5 acres of planting it when I was 19 years old. And I learned a whole lot about planting outside. I learned a lot about sharing, a lot about figuring out what plants out of that whole 5 acres that we were going to bring forward, you know, and why we were going to bring that forward. And he really taught me that. And at that time, he was in his 50s. I don't think that he's around anymore. But he was a lot of the originator of the Northern genetics that we all have. And I learned a lot from him that summer. And then it just went from there. You know, I put myself through university, through swinging bags at Grateful Dead shows. And thank goodness, you know, at the beginning of Grateful Dead tour, I was swinging bricks from Mexico, pretty nasty. And then I started to come out further west, and the reason why I came out further west was because of the good weed, and because of the good people, and because of the good energy that the cannabis community brought me. And then we started swinging the kind, which now we come to find out was the blueberry, the original blueberry out of Eugene, Oregon. My breeding, and Josh told a lot of the in-between there, and then we came up here, been here for 20 years. And my connection to cannabis never ended. I've never been one of those people that felt like, well, I'm gonna take a break for a month, or, you know, this is something that has been a part of my life in every waking moment. Not only do I ingest it, but I think about it, go to bed with it, really take it in. And I feel like a lot of the breeding that I've done has been really a way that a woman maybe would do it. And it's a little bit different because my background is in health and well-being, naturopathic medicine, babies, mamas. And when I'm looking at a plant, I'm really feeling it. This is before we had the ability to do any analysis. This is before we even knew what THCV was or CBG was or any kind of different ratio of 1-to-1. All we knew was smell. All we knew was what the plant looked like. How did it perform? How much did it put out in the end? And what was the finished product like when you smoked it? So all of the smells and everything were part of it, but the ending part was, what did it feel like? And then what did it feel like to all my friends? Because then I would get all of the data back. How did that make you feel? What did that make you feel like? Well, okay, well then, and then if you get enough people that are really excited about it as you are, then that's how we brought that breeding forward. It wasn't just the way the plant looked or the way that it smelled. It was the way that it felt in our greenhouse. It was the way that it felt to us, and it was the way that it felt to all of our friends. And then making medicine out of it, how did it feel to all of the patients, all of the people that we were working with? So it's been a very intuitive sense. And the beauty of all of this is that the intuitive sense now got to be matched with testing. Were we right? Yep, we were right. Because the ones that made us feel the best and the ones that made everybody else feel great and amazing with the full spectrum cannabinoids and the full spectrum terpenes, that's the future of this industry. We just sat with very, very intelligent people in this industry who have been scientists in cannabis for the past 40 years. They call the high THC, the high myrcene market, the pennies market. This is not something that is going to last very long, and it's something that we all are interbreeding these same sort of strains, and they're all sort of cousins of each other. Look for something that's different. High pinene, high camphor, you know, anything that's different. super high terpene ratios. We know that terpenes are getting higher and higher in living soils and regenerative practices in deep beds. We know over time our terpene ratios are going up. Green Source Gardens just got a 6.8% terpene. And Mikey, another regenerative gardener that's amazing down in Spokane, not somebody that's well known at all, just got a 13.4% terpene in flower. So highest one that's ever been recorded. And the reason why that has happened is because it started out at a 3% terpene, and he's been working with it so long in these amazing living beds and bringing it outdoors to rejuvenate it a year after year, and then bringing it indoors. So it's like this indoor-outdoor strain. We can do this by working with each other. We can compare, hey, I got this really awesome strain. We need to move more towards full spectrum. What makes us feel good? Because we did a blind case study and we all sat around and had a whole bunch of joints in front of us. I'll bet the one that we would pick would be probably the one that has the full spectrum terpene and the full spectrum cannabinoids. And that's what the nutraceutical market is looking for in the future. That's what they're going to be buying. It's not going to be the dispensaries that are our big money. It's not going to be the dispensaries that are going to be buying the massive bulk. It's going to be the nutraceutical markets. It's going to be the big people that already have businesses in play, and they're going to be looking for your flower to add to their product, to make a new product that's more of a cannabis product. So I think if I had any advice in going forward is continue with your intuition, with your breeding, match it with testing, and then continue to try to get those full spectrum ratios.
I just want to touch really quickly. When we first came up here in the late 90s, it was really pretty diverse. There was a lot of organic farming going on. It was one of the things that really attracted us to the area that we were in. It just seemed like it was just a real awakening, and it was open in a way that it wasn't in Oregon and California. It was very militant and very guarded and different, but up here it was really open, and then things really started to change with the organized crime and the way that people were buying, and then the buyers, and then our whole entire cannabis market and families up here in British Columbia got fucked by the organized crime buyers, in my opinion, because all of a sudden it's one strain, the hemp star, and for so long it was just a non-smelly thing that people were growing. They were actually growing to not have smell up here for a long time because of the neighbors and everything and all the problems, but they were breeding for crystals, and then it came into aeroponics, and it came into hydroponics, and people's minds just, oh my God, we really made this analogy with that kind of herb and that kind of growing. It's like a bodybuilder, like a super hardcore steroids bodybuilder that can't run around the block. You know what I mean? Or a fake boobs or something that's just wrong, that just looks wrong. And they can't produce milk, you know what I mean? And maybe I'll stop right there, but and unfortunately there was other drugs brought in in place of money, and that went out to our community and really broke up families, and that's a reality here. So I feel here in British Columbia and Canada in general really kind of coming back into the strains. I'm starting to see a lot more new strains coming up. I'm starting to see people go and take a step and make their own genetics and take the step with their buyers. And now that they have more dispensaries that they can work with, or online dispensaries that they can work with, that diversity is honored. And people want to come in and try something different. They don't want to have a weed that looks the same and it's all one strain. So in saying that, we've already said this, but I just really want to encourage you to just bust out of that, and get away from the, those kind of strains and just, continue to develop. Because here in British Columbia, it is kind of, we're working to get back into it. There's ways that we're ahead up here in a lot of ways, and then in some ways we're behind. So that's the beauty of this right here, is all coming together. So kaboom, we're all on the same page.
I feel very, and I'll take you you a little backstory like these folks did to what brought me to that point where I needed to make mindful choices about what I was going to do with what was in front of me. And that was, I was about 21 years old. I was skiing 140, 150 days a year, damn near every day. And I'm skiing alongside someone that's training for the junior Olympic team and the Olympic teams. And I'm popping 8 Advil. He's smoking a bowl every ride. He's crushing it. I have stomach pain. It's not functioning for me. That was an aha moment that I needed to really look at how cannabis can affect me on a daily basis. And then I had the opportunity, it was damn near that next summer, I showed up in Humboldt County on an invite, and then some of the other things came to play. I knew I wanted cannabis that could help sustain a healthy life on a daily basis. And then the property that I could finally get was not south-facing. It wasn't a ridge top, but it was something I could afford, and it was something that I could make my own. So I started looking around Humboldt County for anyone that had something that was coming off early, because I have this amazing set of sun, sunrise to sunset until October 1st, and then the mountain gets in the way and it just cuts us off. So I started sourcing seeds and making some mindful choices, and then that really started to give myself some confidence, because I was seeing really good results to what was happening. And like what Kevin was saying about mapping your farm and your genetic choices for harvest times, our harvest season starts about August 20th and ends about October 5th or so. So that, with 4 or 5 strains during that time, I could take account for an early rain, a late rain, a wind, no wind, sun, all those things are covered by one of my choices. So that helped me to stay at it at a small scale. And scale is something to talk about on a whole other panel. What I consider small and what someone else considers small. But I think I wouldn't consider myself a breeder. I've made mindful choices, and I haven't shared them much because I'm like this father that's guiding these genetics, and I don't know, are you ready to go out into the world? And at some point they will, and I'm going to be super excited and nervous, but at some point I will be sharing. And I want to make one other point as to Josh and Kelly's Zelly's Homesteader. It's a little funny how I have a picture on my Instagram, and I have Afzal Hassan, who's the lead counsel for and CFO or CEO for Candle Royalty. He came to my farm and with a film crew, and he just wanted to capture everything I was saying, doing, and what he was seeing. And the picture I posted is him in front of a Zelly's Homesteader, no caging, like 8 cola heads, just this amazing plant, and he came from Canada to see Canada. It was, I loved it. It was great. So, and that Zelly's that I did, it was in a first year Hugel. It stayed green. It was resilient, and I like to say resilient versus resist. I feel we're resilient as people. We don't resist. Resisting is, do I resist alcohol, or do I not need it? Am I just going forward? So that's just kind of a little bit of how I think about things, and a little bit about some of the genetics that I am holding. One of the things I'm holding is cotton candy, or it's otherwise known as sweet tooth, that was around my neighborhood 15 years ago, and I've never, not in the past decade have I grown it out for flower or for sale. It's only been for breeding purposes. And some of those things that we hold are super valuable in that sense, because
that particular one I have hasn't been mixed with, you know? And same with a grape ape I have from Woodman Creek, you know, north of Laytonville. So some of these are like, when Beth was talking about open cannabis, some of those things you just want to hold, and some of those things I have held, but not because I wanted them to be mine, just because I was nervous and the timing wasn't right. So that goes a little bit to my, let's go slow before we go fast, and we definitely need to share our genetics, but we also need to be mindful with that as well.
When's the first time you threw pollen on a plant? Like I did my first pollination in 81.
89.
Probably more close to 99 for me.
That'd be 97.
When you first started off, was there anybody, like you mentioned you had a mentor in Alaska, and for me, it's funny, I was what I call a brown thumb. My buddy was the green thumb. I'm a manufactured green thumb. That means through relentless pursuit of understanding, I found my position. But when I was young, I was a brown thumb. And my buddy Bounce was the one who had the prop skills. And that was like my first individual that we had some killer stock out of what we call a South African import at the time that came in. And we cracked it in my grandmother's garden. And then the next time I threw a crop, it was all Colombian, and I got busted and got caught a case. And so back in the early 80s. But that memory of shaking the pollen off on the plants at the time was just, I can still see it. And it was just such an inspiration. Because we had no one to really, you know, guide us at the time. It was all self-driven. And as I grew older, you know, you start to find people to follow. And then as a fully grown adult now, there's individuals in the industry that I really respect. And who is someone that you guys do collaborative work with, or you look at and say, hey, I really like the way you're going about your work, or you have interesting directions. You know, so basically it's a shout out to the people that you think are solid. You know, and who are those people if you got someone?
Initially in Eugene, there was mostly let's just call it the backwoods family. I mean, there was a lot. I'm from Southern Oregon. It's an epicenter of growing. I grew up smoking like the best weed. I'm really lucky. And so the original breeders were just families out, you know, where we would have met, and we got some of those seeds. The original breeders that we met up here were ones in our local community who were super radical. Again, people that if I named them, you wouldn't know, but they're really, really special to us. And they were radical weed growers from the 70s and 80s. And they really taught us how to even make the nutrients and grow on the land that we were doing. Then we started traveling, and we started getting into the breeding that we're doing, you know, more currently. And I would, you know, love to say that we love Bodhi seeds. We've been getting a lot of really good terpenes and beautiful flavors from Bodhi. We've gotten good things from Mean Gene, like you said, amazing breeders, Mr. Bob Hemphill, Graham, who was with Coastal, and then Michael Cagu, who's a landrace breeder down in Santa Cruz. Got a lot of inspiration from him. And who am I forgetting? I already said that. Yeah.
Give me 1 second. I gotta go use the restroom.
Do it.
And then you continue the piece on the next.
I love
I'll
it.
be right back.
Yeah.
I think for me, I really have to give it up to DJ Short because, yeah, I have definitely sold hundreds and thousands of pounds and moved hundreds and thousands of pounds of his blueberry, and a lot of his strains that came off the blueberry that became really popular because it had something different. Also, I definitely have to give big ups to a couple of my friends that were in Afghanistan in 1962. They're now in their late 70s, and they talk about this time of bringing over the wide leaf cultivar into the northern Cali area, into the Trinity commune. And then the Trinity Commune at that time, in the late 60s even, were starting to do some breeding with these wide-leaf cultivars. And when I sit down and I talk to them about their experiences and them getting the seeds, you know, way back then and how they did it, you know, they were also moving tremendous amounts of hash, you know. So the seeds weren't paying for anything. The seeds were just something that they got on the side. They didn't even know that it was worth anything. They just thought, oh, well, I'll bring back some seeds and see what happens, give them away to my friends. And then a lot of those people who are all in their 70s that were the first wave of what we call the cannabis culture in North America, I definitely have to give big ups for them for keeping these genetics and then bringing them forward. Also, Snodgrass Genetics, they're doing really amazing things right now. They have a lot of those old cultivars, the Green Dragon, phenomenal, unbelievable terpene profile, somebody to watch in the future as well. But really a lot of my heart and soul goes back to a lot of the old breeders, and Josh and I have been trying to capture a lot of the essences of those landrace strains and trying to bring them back, both through direct seeding of those strains and also trying to bring up the terpene ratios or different memories of when you smoke it or you smell it, it just brings you right back to, you know, 1990 or whatever it was. So really thankful for that.
I have to go.
Josh is speaking at the LIFT conference. He's going to be supporting regenerative cannabis over there in the very sterile area. So he's bringing the soil there to make it all a little bit dirty.
Yeah, I would say for myself again, DJ Short. That's the only name I would pull out from you know, the more notorious breeders. And then back to my friends Eric and Kimber in Woodman Creek, Laytonville. They were the ones. First place I ever went in the mid '90s where they pulled out a file drawer. It was F1, F2, and you're just going, what? I had no idea. And they were doing it so early on, and they were supplying us with females and males and whatever you needed. You could go down there and get your whole farm stock bumped up, whatever you wanted, and doing these early nurseries. And I give them a lot of credit and a lot of honor for doing that early on when it was a whole different scene and a whole different, what would I say, you get in trouble for doing that many, holding that much seed, holding that many plants in one location. And they were pushing it and they were helping a whole community survive. And that's priceless, and we really owe a lot of those people in all of our communities a lot of respect. And then, you know, in Southern Humboldt, I would always have to refer to Doug Furr. He made the trip. And, you know, we're not, as a community, we're not proud of the Murder Mountain series because they pitched it to us in a very different way than it came out. But if you can take it with that lens and look at some of the history that was recorded in that series, and Doug is featured in there, and he delivers a really nice piece in there. If you could look at 5 minutes of that episode and kind of put on your blinders for the rest, the sensationalized part. But some of these folks that put it on the line to go and deliver some of those genetics back to us. And you know, I really like what Kelly and Josh and Kevin has spoke about wide leaf and narrow leaf. The first time I heard about or realized that, I kind of always thought that in my mind, versus indica sativa. Max Montrose makes a lot of reference to that and a lot of education around how to identify that all the way through to the final flower. And I really like going forward talking wide leaf, narrow leaf personally. And in California right now, you're supposed to identify, you know, 80% sativa. I'm getting these calls like, is it 80? Is it? It's like, I don't, what? And maybe you can shine some light on that, but I don't have a way to judge what percentage something is sativa or indica at this moment.
Well, I mean, genealogically, it's all sativa.
Yeah.
And people really hate to hear that. And so it's based off of
I wanted to open
perception.
the can of worms.
And the perception is, what effect are you seeking? And that's what they're really asking. Is it ethereal, sedative? And the stuff was, when we talk about myrcene stuff, was in terms of breeding or desire, is that I noticed, I like to look at patterns. And so I was sitting there one day and we had a discussion with some friends about the evolution of OG Kush as this exploding market. This would have been maybe 11, 12 years ago when it was just pounding. And someone said it was a fad, and I said, no, it's not a fad, I can tell, I can see the movement of it. So I started really taking a look at the populations of people who bought it. And it didn't make sense because it didn't fit typical users. And I was like, why are these people using OG Kush? So I did a random sample of 1,000 people. I learned when I was in school that 1,000 people, 1,000 of anything, gives you a population profile that's adequate for any size population. And I did this 1,000-person random sample, and it was easy because I was getting about 140 people a day through the storefront. So it gave me all these people to talk to. And I just put a pad of paper in the front, and I would answer the questions, and I would ask them discreetly. And what we found was that the individuals who were buying OG Kush were buying it because they were using it as an opiate replacement. And so I started messing around with OG varietals in terms of potency because I figured maybe it was these high numbers. And it wasn't, it was due to terp profiles. So I made this assertion that OG Kush would never run out of vogue in America because we have such an opiate issue. And that's what you see in terms of like breeding directions, is that if you're trying to satisfy this unbelievable market of opiate users in America that want to replace opiates with cannabis, it has to be in those fuel-based profiles. And so when you're talking about breeding and going directions, it's difficult to have people understand, what it is that they really want because they don't understand why they're using it. And people have been convinced that sativa is this and indica is that, and it's so definitively clear. And even within regions that we would call indica, they had sativa-like effects and indica-like effects. And so it's not such a simple thing, and I think it's a re-education of the market, the consumer market, and you have to slowly let that happen or you make people feel like they're not knowledgeable. Then they become aggressive, and then they shun you, and then they look for confirmation of their choices, and then they go by that. So most of the time when people ask for advice, they don't really want advice, they want confirmation of their own belief. And they'll ask 100 people, and the one that tells them what they originally wanted to hear is the one they listen to. And so, that happens with us in what we do, and as breeders, if you're choosing directions, you have to understand this so you can go after these specific markets and be able to, capture them. And then work with the education on what is the varieties, and that's why we had talked earlier about these ratios between terpenes so that you can make it easier for people to understand. And then you start to talk about the morphological characteristics of the varietals, meaning their plant shape, so that people can say, oh, I got you, I want short and stocky because it stays correct for my location. If it's tall and willowy, it won't work. And then they can start to understand how to better look at this picture. But man, is it tough to get the public to understand this without offending them because they've been magazine educated. And that education really makes it difficult for a lot of us to be able to release work and go forward. And you notice that everybody's taken anything that's trendy out of the dispensary market and they hybridize that. And they hybridize that. Not because they liked it, but because it's marketable. And so I take a look at anything that's trendy and I look at every breeder and I go, I got you. You took everything trendy and hit it with this male. Then I go back in their career and you did the same thing here, and you did the same thing here. They're not working and developing varietals that have an ability to work over time. And that's really what you mentioned Doug Furr and then yourself and people who went from the past, where they're working on stuff that works in an area that each year it's been able to pick up the genetic material needed to survive in the drought season and the wet season, when the caterpillars came out, which ones didn't get devoured, which ones survived, which ones sold, which ones gave you the sensations that you wanted, and you're using that as this massive pool to pull from. And you mentioned earlier, Bob and Gene, these guys have been weaving these lines together for time, so they have base genetic material that they use that they know that's pretty homozygous, which means consistent for the traits they desire. And then they can weave the direction And I would say if you want to see who was the most successful at that as a famous breeder that we see in seed catalogs was Simon from Serious Seeds. Where what Simon from Serious Seeds did was he created his own lines based off a massive population basis. So he was a breeder who worked for a large seed company, but he was a school teacher. And so he leaves that company and he goes on a search globally to get the material that he wanted to use. And to me, what he did was he created a modern skunk one, but he added some African genetics so that he could drive in a more ferocious, aggressive high. And it gave him that potential within the plant line. And then he could, until he lost all those parental plants from these massive 10,000 plant sifts, he was able to enter the same exact genetic material in terms of form, and he could steer it into what they would call indica categories and compete, sativa categories and compete, mixed categories and compete, all using the same exact genetic material, the seed source, and he could steer the directions based off of that. Because in the genetic pile you're working with, you can steer directions. And so your steering of a pile and my steering of a pile results in two different directions. And those steering of those piles actually works when you run these concurrent lines and you can bounce them across each other and you can actually kind of restore vigor. So inbreeding depression can be restored from running concurrent lines using the same material but chasing different directions, and you can bounce them back into each other. And those methods allow you to take material that is consistent and limited population, meaning total numbers, and be able to have the ability to move as the market desires. And so in the US, California specifically, people do not want ethereal cannabis. They want to be depressed. They want to have something that sits them down and shuts them up and turns off the switches, because they don't want stimulation. And if you go back to the 70s, that was like the heyday of stimulatory cannabis, where people were really about lifted mentality and belief the world was going to be a better place. And then you get 1980 comes in, and you start having the Reagan era, where the military became just an absolute machine. And it was the end of the finances for most people in the United States, where the change in ownership of company money versus worker in company money, dramatically different. And it started to change how we wanted to buy cannabis, what we chose. The indoor revolution of the Dutch advertising of their products through magazines that made you believe that if it won a cannabis cup, it was superior. And we know that the majority of these cups are just basically bought, pay-to-play kind of situations. So all that reality is not real. And that's where a lot of the breeders, guys like I know Doug, he's solid, but these are old school guys that we don't give a shit what's in the magazine. This is good grass, it's gonna be good grass. And that's where the stuff on the islands, because I came here in '96 to get stock off the islands, because I needed stuff that could handle a coastal application. And I had access to all the stock that was from the interior, but I needed stuff that would work on close proximity to the ocean, with shorter cyclical times, that we could do outdoor. And when I took a look around and realized it was up in BC that I would find that. It was, I had Naples hybrids, and I had the Mighty Mite lines. And so I went through those lines and I found stuff that had a resistance, because some of the Mighties were a little too heavy. But, and we lost all those genetics in raids over the course of years. And if you've done this long enough, so much of our foundation stock is gone. And that's gonna bring us back to the next question of if you could go back in time and salvage one thing that you touched through the years of working, what was that thing?
I need a minute.
Well, we worked with the Nepalese, big time. We did a lot of interbreeding for a whole lot of years on our Gorilla Grow with the Nepalese. What an amazing hash plant. Wow. I haven't seen anything like that in a really long time. Huge dripping crystals. Yeah, I don't know about if I could go back. I think if I could go back, I would go back to 1990 in Cambodia. I got a bag of weed from a kid on the back of a motorbike. And it was some of the best stuff that I had ever smoked. It didn't look real pretty, and it had a whole bunch of seeds in it. And I saved the seeds, and then I don't know what happened to them. So maybe someday I'll find them. But I think about those seeds sometimes when I go to bed, or I'm feeling a little bit low and maybe I need to feel a little bit lower. I'll think about those seeds from Cambodia. So I think I'll go back to that.
For me, it would be 1999 banana caramel. And it came from my friends again from Woodman Creek. And I keep asking them, even last year I ran into them, I was like, did anybody get any of that? Is it any, like remotely? And it's nowhere, and it was, you know, very much a sativa plant, you know, long, skinny, went a little long for my terroir there in southern Humboldt-Benbow, that northeast face that I have. But rain, it didn't matter, none of that affected it. And for me, I don't chase the terpene names. I haven't gone to that point. I have other things in my brain that I'm chasing. And one little side note on that, I have a lot of interaction with end users or the consumers, in the current consumers in the new market. And I'm dealing with people that are walking into a dispensary, and they're not concerned with that either. They're concerned with a smile, a glance. It smells like pancakes, it smells like blueberries, it smells like something they can relate to. That's what they're happy about, and that's what they come back for, is something they can identify the smell with a memory. You were saying memories. Mm-hmm. So going forward, that's something to think about in your marketing of something. You're gonna have a lot of education if you're gonna try to get them to remember all these names, but if you can have them remember blueberry, that's pretty easy. But I kind of got off track there because I started thinking about smoking some blueberry.
It's in a bad tangent.
Yeah, where did that go? Where did it go?
About feeling well and what types.
Banana caramel.
Banana caramel.
We're all looking for banana caramel now.
Hit reset.
No, it's the same thing, you know, like for me being older, and I said I want to go back in time, and I started doing old skunk hunts, where I started going after all these skunk lines that I was into. And someone asked, you know, what's the direction you want to work with in forward? And I said, I want to work in those lines. And what I found was that there's a tremendous number of people globally that hold these materials. They still hold these pieces in small form, and they're usually children of 70 to 80-year-old people. So the 70 to 80-year-old people are the ones who did all this initial work, and then their kids are holding the seed lines, and they want to be able to bring those seed lines forward in some capacity because it's a homage to the parents. And so the work that I'm doing on digging some of this stuff up, I got into this project, and the next thing you know, I get hit up for people all over the earth saying, hey, I have all this material I want to share with you so that we can be part of this project, so that we can basically have the culture of our parents move forward and get these materials back out into the world. And it's, so for me, when someone says, you know, where do I want to go, it's there. I want to go back into some of these very specific lines, because if you do too much work at once, it's impossible. You can't focus well enough. It's too diminished. You have to basically stay in one track. And so for me, when someone says, what do you focus on? It's working on those from late 70s to 90 skunk lines that were able to still have loud or audacious odors, because we didn't have to worry about the smell issues. And I call it BC, before charcoal. And those are the things that I know it's funny. But yeah, exactly. But I mean, I'm somebody that was involved in pulling those plants out of the system, because I was someone who was a scene builder. I used to build operations all over the place, hot operations. And part of the hot operation was most people didn't have the, for lack of a better word, balls to deal with the smell. And so in order to run these operations, you had to throttle it back, and there was no filtration at the time. And so we started finding cultivars and lines that had less signature odor. And lo and behold, you know, a geneticist was like, he was always says, yeah, I want to cry when I hear you were involved in that. And I said, well, I'd like to cry too, but it was the reality of the time. Mm-hmm. And so now it's to go back to find these incredibly loud varietals that had these interesting experiences. And so when someone said, you know, what are you into, where are you going? I'm going that route. And that's a question, where do you guys want to go? What's the directions you'd like to take as you go forward?
Just adding a little bit about what you're talking about with the skunk. Another breeder that I really love is Duke Diamond. He's working with a lot of the original skunks, and something that he is also a pure certified breeder. And he's somebody that breeds, I mean, to go into his grow rooms, he's not holding back. He doesn't care about mildew. He doesn't care about bugs. He wants to know what's going to be totally resistant. So breeders like that are really important, because you know that when you get that seed, it's something that's viable, it's something that's worthy, it's something that means something, and it's something that was worked on for a really long time. It's just sort of adding to that. And where I would like to be in the future is, I think that it's sort of a hard question. Mostly I want to be working with cannabis. And I think that, I think that I'm gonna go ahead and talk about the elephant in the room here, is I know that a lot of people are feeling this like quickening and trying to get something happening and make something work. And oh God, I haven't gotten my Health Canada number. Have you guys gotten your Health Canada number? Who got your Health Canada number? Oh shit, I haven't got. And then you go to bed and you're feeling like, oh shit, I've been working in this industry for 30 years. Am I gonna be shut out of it? And is the real worry whether you're going to be shut out of it or not? But the real worry is my relationship that I've been working so long on, my potent, tight relationship with this cannabis plant, going to end? I think that's what we're all really afraid of. If we like cut it all the way down to the root of it, I think that that's, what we're all feeling. And that's not going to happen. This is a lifelong relationship that we have with this plant. And I can see all of you all in this room, and the breeders that I've worked with, and the people that, I've bought numerous pounds from, and people that, we've helped out along the way, and people that have helped us. Those are the people that are part of this cannabis culture. And I'd like to go so far as to say that, I'm a white girl from the East Coast. I don't have a culture. This is my culture. This is the only culture that I have. And I think it's very important that we continue to bring this culture forward in our breeding. Bring it forward in a way that diversifies the genetics and says something about what kind of breeder you are, what kind of grower you are, who you are. And I've always had a hunch for a long time, and now the science is starting to show that. Why is it that we take a full spectrum plant and I put it in a really stressful situation? The THC just goes up through the roof. Terpene profile is gone, but the myrcene is still there. I think my hunch is right, that we've been stressing out these genetics for a really long time, and high THC is showing us the cortisol in the plant. And I think that we owe it to the plant to bring it back to its origination, where we started from, so that it can have full spectrum, so that it can grow healthy, so that we can get that fusarium and that pythium out of there. Because what Kevin was talking about earlier, 70%, you're finding 60% pythium, fusarium in our stock. So we're just trading a whole bunch of diseases. And of course we have to be a part of the market. And of course we have to sell some of these, strains that are that people want to know the name of. That's great. Keep it a portion of your garden. And keep another portion of your garden, something that's your legacy garden, something that's going to be a legacy for your children, a legacy for yourself, a legacy for your farm, something that's going to brand you and separate you out from somebody else, something that's different, something that's not high THC and myrcene. So I think if I have to say where do I want to be in the future, I want to be with you guys.
Greg's like, I don't want to follow that shit. I'm good, man. We just got a new question. Just talk to me about something else.
I'm fired up. I have a hard time sitting. I want to pace, and that's part of my thought process. But a lot ran through my head right there, and one of them is I want to try to have some actionable steps for you guys, and have something that you can actually take away, and not just like, oh, Greg was a skier, blah 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 over here. It was the process of the breeding, and you were saying, about one marker that somebody bounced off of for a long time, and that would have been like, for me, my cotton candy or sweet tooth. I want to pay homage to whoever's going to claim that original. But I've only been working around that space and exploring it. And that's helped me to be calm, mindful, and thoughtful. And that also in your crop planning, a really close friend of mine, you know, for me, I'll have 5 different strains that I'm putting out to market. He'll have 40. Every time you stop and start a batch or whatever you want to call it these days, you're going to have loss. And you're going to have loss because somebody had to stop and start work, somebody had to renumber something, you had to get another test, and then you end up with, I've got 5 ounces of that, or I've got 5 pounds of that, and you have these stop and start points. So I think it's really mindful to be aware of that as far as from a bottom line point. And then paying homage to who bred something and the name and the legacy left on that. Dealing with the distribution model right now, so we would send product, I would name it, I would get like a R&D test on it, I'd send it to them, and you know, it was a strain name that they maybe were getting nervous about because it was, you know, I'll say Skittles. We were putting it out as Zittles with a Z, blah, blah, blah. But instead of coming back to us, or instead of going back to the breeder that was using that name, they just had a board meeting and they said, that's Debbie's Donuts today. And I'm going, whoa, like we should maybe let, you know, Shiloh know that that's his, you know, where that's gone. And they said, no, he's got to learn. And I didn't do that. I contacted Shiloh right away, and we came together and we came up with the name Blue Diamonds, and that's what it's going out as when I put it out, and it goes through the other channels. They're still calling it Debbie's Donuts, but that's up to them. It's not really that, but I don't want to say what it is. But I think that's really important. And now what I've done with Shiloh is he's gonna say, hey, let's make sure we work together with him. Let's collaborate. And the same thing happened with Leo Stone. He was over at my house, and I had seeds from I had a seeded pound from another person in my community I was working with, and it wasn't intended to be seeded, it just worked out that way. And some seeds popped out of a bud that we were rolling, and you know, of course they were, oh, can we have these? And I was like, oh yeah, okay, and I had to come all the way back, and I literally had to take the seeds away. I said, you know what, I gotta contact them and make sure they're okay with that. Leo literally went to his truck right then and came out and gave me some seeds. So it's having the backbone to stomach and go, yeah, I can't really do this yet, I need to have more conversation around it, and honoring the person that did the work before you to get it to a place where you're at right now, I think is really important. And that would help connect the dots and help tell the story about these skunks and these land races, and keep this culture going is the storytelling and the elders telling the story. And to bring it to the point where would I like to see myself? I made this commitment to myself about 3-4 years ago when it was coming to, do you want to be a cannabis brand? Do you want to, you know, expand your farm to infinite size? And I said, no, Alpenglow is going to be the credibility for me to go out into the world and do what I'm doing right now, and that's help other folks learn from my mistakes and maybe share in some collaborative movement for either regs or appellations projects or any of these other things, setting up whatever. But I'm not looking to get that bigger, and I'm not looking to chase a golden carrot, just looking to raise my daughters and my daughters take on the farm and to hopefully do the same thing.
There's so many people that did work that got screwed, and it absolutely turned them off from trying to continue forward. And I use a story about this, because he had like a story of redemption. So there's Eric from HBK, who does some stunning work, and he comes out with this line, and he shares a single copy with someone who then renames it and puts it into the dispensary system in Sacramento, when Sacramento, California was exploding, and it's called Green Ribbon. And it becomes the hottest varietal in that whole region. You couldn't hold this product in a store. It was just on fire. And it becomes this monster of an indoor varietal, and it's in extreme demand and unbelievably profitable for everyone who touched it. But Eric's name had been stricken from this varietal. And so years later, and I get a hold of it, I get a hold of this plant. So I hunt plants well. And so I hunt this plant and I get my hands on it. And I might be the only one that had the copy of it down the road. And years later, I know Eric, and so years later, he DNAs his material, and that's why I like these, you don't get stampings, because it helps you figure out what's related to what degree. And he calls me on the phone because we're friends, and he said, Kev, how come our plants are related? And I said, oh, easy, somebody stole your shit and gave it to me, and you have the source, because I knew that it had come from him. And so I went online, and every time I had a chance, I would try to tell that story and then correct people's information so that the person who had done all this work, who didn't get paid for all that success, was at least able to get credit for their work. And then he just won the Emerald Cup this year as the breeder for the Chili Verde. So his Chili Verde plant, and then Eric isn't breeding this year as a breeder because he couldn't get a license. Because in order to be a licensed breeder in California, you have to have a nursery license. A nursery license, it depends where you're at, requires industrial commercial property and a whole bunch of other stuff, which makes it extremely financially prohibitive. So he went into topical maker, because he's also topicals. So he shifts into topicals, where he can get a license, where he can function. And he's all sad because he spent all these years as a good breeder, putting out really nice work, and he never got the credit he deserved. And one of his masterpieces got stolen from him, and he
Completely humble man.
Oh yeah, and nice guy, man, and genuine good dude. And this year, he finally gets his just reward of Chili Verde from HBK, wins the Emerald Cup for Craft Farmer. And I knew JD that grew it, and he did a beautiful job. And it was this story, though, of what you have to remember, because when you steal the credit from people who are creatives, you stop them. You stop them from being creative, and they no longer share the work. They don't have a desire to put the material out. And you radically change your success, because you just think that if I got a cut from this guy, I'll have it for the rest of my life, it'll be what I need. The reality is you need their creative angle. And so he created something that absolutely resonated. He gets screwed. He creates something else, and he loses the ability to produce, but boom, it now immortalizes him as a winner of a massive competition in a sense that it validates it. And so it's that type of behavior that, as you guys go forward, we talked about, make sure you know who your friends are, and realize that, like, I have people hit me up all the time, and they're like, hey, could I get 3 copies of everything in your library? And you laugh and you're like, everything, you want the whole library and only yeah, just a couple copies of everything you have. And I always laugh, and I'm like, no, take the shit that's on commercial, you can take that. The only people that I'll give access to the smaller stuff are people who take the time to be polite, because it's hard to be tricky when you're being viewed by the person who's viewing you. So if you're good at detecting bullshit, you can pick it up. And you be careful who you let some of this material go to. And as you go forward, you know, what you can end up doing is, in the past, you didn't have to run so many varieties. You were able to work your population, and you were able to get other killer stuff from your friends. And that's why when we were talking earlier about genetic selection, it was really about how do you work in concert so that you can put the effort into where your desires are, what you really like, what is going to work for you. And then you're able to support your friends, partners doing the same situation in their respective areas. And then you can share the cultivars for production sources, but the parentage, the parental lines are held back, and it doesn't force you to have such a massive library of so much material. Once you start getting this much material put together, you're going to start to mix it. It's going to become problematic. And so much of it is trying to make sure that the process is easy, so that you can actually create lines and work a direction that you believe. And I think for a lot of people, they have to realize too that sometimes you're going to chase it down the street for years and realize you went down the damn wrong road. And you just have to say, okay, it's all right. I didn't create anything better than my parental. So if the progeny isn't better than the parent, you're going down the wrong road. You have to go back. And then you can go down another road. And I think that, you know, when it comes to seed breeding, it's just like culture. It's timeless. It's a never-ending process. And the ability to have that timelessness is imperative. And now we got a little bit, any questions? You guys got some questions about anything to do with breeding, directions, desires? Shoot.
Let's talk about dudding. So when someone says a cut's been dudded, right? Like everyone's like, okay, it's not going to flower, it's not going to have something that if it was undudded, and that's like my kind of understanding of it. Would you say that there's different kinds of dudding of clones?
Yeah,
some that can come back?
I would say there's a different dudding. I think that what you have is, I was involved in a virology project, so I had a bunch of virologists bring me material and say, hey, all these plants have been identified to have some unnamed, unknown virus, but it blocks your vascular bundles. So it's forming some kind of crystallization within the xylem and the phloem, restricting sugar and liquid moving through this passageway. And what was taking place was it was creating no ability to grow and having extremely reduced terp levels, extremely reduced cannabinoid levels, and all in all, poor. So people were like, well, it's because of something. Well, the virologist identified, because they could slice this open under a microscope and say, look, what we're seeing is these signs, these traces. And they wanted to see if we could somehow organically, biologically, get it to straighten out. And so that's when I started using these earth box systems as a system where the plant, because it was, for most people, you have to make it easy for them in their world. And so my thing has always been getting product to the table. So what I want to do is make it as simple as possible for regular people to have success. And I renamed that earth box reclamation Ghetto Microcrop, because it was very inexpensive and cheap, and what it did was it allowed the plant to work biologically to be able to kind of stabilize, and then we were able to take the plants from that and grow new source material from dudded plants that virologists from the university told me these have issues. I then ran them. We pulled new source material from the top, just like if we were doing meristematic culture, and we were able to go from, and I use dudding on clonal, where if you cut 700 clones and you get 2 that root, there's a problem. So that's how we started to figure out some of this, and how do we define this word dudding? Does it just not produce, or does it not replicate? And we were able to go right back into these 98, 99% success rates with cloning. So we go from 2 out of 700 to 698 out of 700. And the virologist said, hey, the virus is still present, but no longer impacting the plant. So they couldn't identify what it was that was creating the problem, and they knew that it was still present, but at a level that was so low that it didn't cause this issue any longer. And so there's that kind of dudding. And then I believe you have dudding from where plants that are annuals aren't meant to be held in clonal form indefinitely. Now this is an opinion, but it's an opinion based off of holding plants for an unbelievably long amount of time in libraries for decades. So I'm somebody who's banking stock forever. And what I started to see was plants that were held in chemical bottom ends under artificial light over the course of time degraded. And I just called it a degradation. And what we found is that when we took these varietals and put them back outside under natural sunlight with a organically based, biologically driven bottom end, the plant would literally restore itself. And when I got to hang out with some brilliant light scientists from Europe, they talked about the information that comes from light, not just the energy. And this information that activates the plant, activates the microbial interrelationship between the soil and the plant. And I would take plants, I still get them now. I get plants from the 80s that they call them dudded out, and they bring them to me so I can restore them, so I can give you back the material so that you can now still run it. And I do it the same way every time. Organically based bottom end, sunlight inoculation, and we'll literally watch these plants almost crack the stems, and you'll see brand new cambial materials start to form, and you start to see an entire resurrection of these worn out cultivars, where then we can take the new material, the new stock off top, new scion, and then propagate that, and we're right back into a beautiful plant. And so for my friends that run indoor operations only, because that's what they work with, what they do is they give me material, and then I run it through an inoculation system every summer, and then they can run that clonal material for an entire season, and then I re-inoculate every summer for them. So what it does is it lets them have plants that are priceless, that have value, but have deteriorated. And I don't think I'm smart enough to understand why. I just know that they're just not meant for what we're giving them. We're not giving them enough information, and they start to break down. So dudding from viral, and dudding from incomplete nutrition and incomplete light information.
I'd like to say something on that as well. We do a lot of testing of our soil. We do a lot of testing of our water. We're doing testing of the strains and testing of the flower. One thing that we are not looking at, and I really encourage all of you all to go down the long wormhole of the endophytic reaction within plants. This is something that's incredibly important. We're finding that endophytes can be counted within the plant, and this is the endo-fungi and bacterial reaction and symbiosis that happens within the plant. And just like we have a tremendous amount of microorganisms that are intelligent within us, so does the cannabis plant. And what we're finding is if you start looking at a lot of old research, that cannabis actually has more endophytes than maybe say corn. And this is why I like to call it a master plant. So we need to start getting in tune with endophytes. We need to start studying that, because my guess with that dudding is that the endophytes have started to lose their virality, and they've also started to lose their numbers as well as diversity. So we know that we can bring endophytes back into the system by scrubbing them, and we also know that we can do it by putting it back into its natural place, which is a beautiful, healthy, deep soil system, so that that healthy, symbiotic, endophytic reaction and actually endophytes come back into the plant. So if you all don't know what I'm talking about, go look it up, become experts. Come back next year and teach me something about it.
Are you guys going to get into tissue culture, talking about all that, or feminized seeds? Kind of some.
We can. I mean, I have a tissue culture lab that's our lab partner that feeds our facility. But tissue culture was really, it was created in the 50s to do orchid work, because orchid propagation is tough. So they get into TC work to do orchids, and then they start to realize that with a lot of commercial crops, they're so pathogenically prone because they're bottlenecked that you can't hold mother stock in any concentration without issues, and so it's easiest to do it in a sterile culture.
And this is Alan Capular's work.
Yeah, and this is all basically, if you're eating a strawberry today, it's from TC. If you're eating a banana, it's from TC. Most fruit and nut trees are from TC. A lot of efficiency in the process once it's dialed in. But cannabis is a tricky one. Cannabis is tricky. And so it's a lot of work, because what you have to do is you got to create a number of base formulations to run each one of your cultivars into to find out the fundamental direction. And then from there you can refine the direction. And there is no real paperwork for most people to access, because anybody who's done this well is they're holding it proprietary. And so we use TC because I played around with what happens when you actually run cannabis in large canopy with no chemical regulators, right? So let's just be real here. What happens? It's a nightmare to try to control in these exceptionally dense populated nurseries. So nursery models mean, to me, flower and cannabis isn't tough, because as a life in a bird, you do it, within a cyclical amount of time it ends. Nurseries are 365, that shit's running non-stop with perpetual. And you talk about stress, I mean, lop off your arms and legs and then regrow them and tell me about how your system's taking it. So if you want to really see some stress, run a nursery. And if you want to see canopy density, run a nursery. And if you want to be able to see where you're going to have plants that are held for time that can harbor problems, run a nursery. And I wanted to find out, could you do this with an extremely limited toolbox on a level that's profitable, where you're actually punching out numbers, and it's a nightmare. And so I realized that for the regulatory process, it favors technology because in California, technology funded legal cannabis. So they created a system that is ideal for technology to be the tool. So I said, well, look, if this is the game we're going to play, then we're going to play the game. And it allows you to be able to do multiplication, and it allows you to do all this stuff, but you know, I keep redundant living plants and biologically living bottom ends somewhere so that I have material in a form that I trust versus in, you can hold it in cryo, you can hold a whole library in a cookie jar. Well, when you have a problem with the cookie jar, you just lost the whole library. So TC isn't the solve-all, be-all, do-all, but it's a phenomenal tool. And when people talk tissue culture, they're either talking meristematic culture or they're talking node culture, because we're not using callus in cannabis. So you're either going from, I need to scrub it to get rid of pathogens, or I've already scrubbed it and I could go from nodal, and that's pretty quick. But the problem is going from node, from sterile to non-sterile, and get them to bite in, build out, and what's the time? And so it's not a tool for breeding, and it doesn't remove intersex traits. It doesn't remove lack of quality. It just takes a plant and gets rid of baggage, things that have been added on over time, accumulated pathogenic pressure can be pulled out, and that's viral, fungal, bacterial, insect, anything can be scrubbed and cleaned. So you start off with what you had, but it doesn't improve it. It just gets rid of the baggage. So it's a phenomenal tool, and we utilize it so we can scrub all these old varieties, because once we started using lab analysis to find out, what are we looking at? Because if I can analyze the plant before I put it into culture, it lets me know, do I need to go meristematic, or can I go directly nodal? The difference is about 4.5 months. So there's a big difference in time to go from microscopic cell to a visible cell. So if I don't have to go to meristematic, I would prefer it. But the amount of material that's coming through our system that's carrying stuff that you don't see is unreal. And the issue with that in business is that if there's any problems whatsoever, nobody's responsible for their screw-ups anymore. So if you're dealing with a large entity, they're coming with a large lawyer. And if that lawyer isn't in your neighborhood, you have to get a lawyer that's registered to fight a problem in that other neighborhood. So now you need 2 lawyers. You need your lawyer to interpret the problem. You need another lawyer to fight the problem. And then now you have to prove that you're not liable for this problem. And so the only way to me to really work with this new situation is to create a stamp on a product that says, at this moment in time, it's clean. And now you can sign a contract that says, that shit's on you. Because I tour all these operations in Southern California, and they're huge. And I talked to the lead cultivator, and I talked to him, like, how long have you been here? He goes, a couple months. And I'm like, this thing's been going on for a couple of years. He goes, I know, I'm the 5th guy. And then I meet the CEO, and he's the 3rd CEO, and only the investor remains. The investor is kicking these people out as quick as he can because any problem becomes this. And so the finger pointing is unbelievable. And so anyone who puts themselves into a situation where you can get caught up in some litigation, oh my God, you're gonna die right now. And so TC to me is this way to get around some of these problems where you can stamp it, date it, prove it, protect yourself. I mean, this isn't even cannabis to me anymore. This is commercial ag. But it is what it is, and I can't change that. So I just say, all right, I got you. So TC has an incredible usage. It's a phenomenal tool. If you do not have pathogenically prone plants that are problematic, that are issues, if you can keep in isolation, normally propagated. Prop it like normal. Why would you want to go through all that trouble? If you have an ability to take old stock and have it scrubbed, it's between, in the States, anywhere between, say, 5 to 10 grand, depending on who charges you. And so about say, we'll call it 6,000 on average. Where for $6,000, you can take a plant to somebody and say, scrub this, hand it back to me, with zero pathogenic pressure internal. And now you have something that's clean. So we just scrubbed up all the old OGs, all these things from the past, we scrubbed them. So now we have them in a clean form. But does that mean that they're protected? No. That shit could blow right in your room and recontaminate it.
So just curious, how long does that process take? Like I don't really know much about it.
6 months. If you bring someone a plant, they're gonna have to take it, and then they're gonna have to cut into it, pull out the cell, and then have enough cells to pull out to find out which medium it even survives in. See, the difference with regular TC is that if you're gonna go into doing bromelates, you're gonna have a cookbook that's gonna tell you, here is all the ingredients and the process needed. Well, where's that for cannabis? Where's your successful map in cannabis? Anybody got one? No, we're mapping it ourselves as we run forward. And everyone and their brother's doing this right now. It's the hot word. I swear to God, I think there was like 400 of these labs popping up in LA. Everybody and their brother's the new tissue culture experts. And they're all talking the same crap, you know, I'm doing this stuff, I got a flow hood, I got a refrigerator, I got a thing, and I'm like, and you are skilled at this? No. I read a couple articles on the internet. And I'm looking at and I'm laughing because I'm working with people that have 20 years of experience in other industries doing tissue culture only, and they were the lead tissue culture head of a division that was doing, you know, 20, 30 million cuttings a year. And cannabis is kicking the shit out of them. And I'm watching it because I get to consult on these jobs, and I'm like, it's unbelievable because these are brilliant. To be a PhD doesn't mean necessarily that you're the end all of that either, but it means you really went deep down the cookie hole to get that info. And then if you got 20 years of in the field experience, you have enough scientific conceptual knowledge, and then you have actual practical knowledge.
To know about one thing.
Yup. And when you're that good at that thing, and cannabis is thumping you on some things, where you'll find out that it's like a nightmare. So they get all happy when they find one that strikes. So I have a platinum sour diesel cut that just, boom, it went off. And they look, they dance around, everyone's happy. But I'm like, I know, but I need the other 65 plants that I got in the library cleaned. Oh yeah, well look, and they just keep wanting to point to that one because you want to enjoy your victory. But what about the ones we're not victorious on? And so it's a lot of money, and you don't have to do this. If you just a typical lab analysis in this case is like $200. So you just send a tissue sample to a lab and have them do a virology report, and they're going to tell you, hey, what's present in this plant? And if it says there's no issues, don't worry about it. Get it into an organic bottom end. I always always throw biologically based because organic's a phrase that we're really not allowed to stamp on stuff, and it becomes a buzzword. So I just use biologically based, living based, non-chemically derived. Get a living bottom end so the plant can start to function on a normal level that it understands, and get it with some sunlight so it gets the information, and you have a beautiful varietal to work with. If it's contaminated, scrub it. If it's not contaminated, why spend the money? And so feminization, that was created for the cucumber industry. So they create feminized cucumbers so they don't have to have the same culling amount, so they can simplify the process. And feminization is a great tool to be able to push your cluster. You're only working with a specific part of the line. You're not bringing in the male that you would use, so you have a different distribution. But, and a lot of people had a lot of success, but you know, when I talked to some of the people that were really, you know, analytical labs, what they noticed was microscopic seed formations in these, and they had issues that they brought up that they said, hey, you know, you can't see this, but we see this. We see instabilities. And so for me, I would rather not go that route. And it's a personal reason. It's kind of like the autoflowers, where autoflowers are becoming very, very good, but they're still pretty muddled because the cannabis that they use to drive that autoflower trait, time dependent, not photoperiod dependent, to me is garbage cannabis. So, garbage, you know, and so I don't like the way it smokes. And so it makes it muddled and muddy and bland and just like no quality. Well, those are red hot right now for the extraction industry because you can run an auto crop early and then have it light off, harvest, and then put in your second crop. But it's all frankenweed to me.
It's alive.
Yay!
Also, I think,
yeah,
I was just thinking about tissue culture. You know, we can put it into a scientific lab and get what we're calling scrubbing, and it makes it clean. But we also know that soil can clean genetics as well. And we do have a lot of that research that's already been done in other different types of cultivars of plants. So, you know, really sparking the immune system, which is the soil and the plant, can definitely clean plants over a period of time. That's something that we've been doing for a lot of years. Many breeders will give us their, you know, low down and they're not doing very well, but this is totally amazing. Come on, you guys, you can do something with it. All we do is put it into our deep soil beds, give it a couple of years, then we give it back to the person, and it's totally devoid of any type of pathogens. So yet another way, you know, to turn towards nature, just to clean it up, not necessarily for all the other things that you do for TC.
No, she's totally right. It's a function of time, and so it depends on what you're doing, and we should look at this on a timeless line, but that's not how your competitors are looking at this. They're not looking at this on a timelessness. They are in a rush and they're moving quickly, and so you need to make sure you're moving with them in some degree, so that you're able to at least stay alive and competitive and use the tools that are present.
How do you feel about the storage of genetics and everything through just pure seeding, be it interbreeding with species, just bringing it back to that seeding point, and then between growing from, say, a clone or giving the true expression of seeds and the individual chemobars or phenotypes that you're getting from that?
I relate to the market.
Yeah.
And if you have a
And
market
your growing
that,
practices.
you have a market that want Nike sneakers, and you're going to give them a really nice pair of Reeboks and some Keds and some Converse and some Skippies, and they go, I don't want that shit, I want Nike. You have a problem. Now, if you can take that form and you can, I talked to someone the other day that had taken his crop and turned it all, because he had pretty close resemblance to the varietals that came off his line, he was able to blend them all as hash, and it let him have that representation of the total from the season, which I thought was awesome, and I know that the total expression would be phenomenal to consume. So I was like, oh, that's brilliant. You don't concentrate that and blend that, you have too much variation, and because the plant-to-plant variation is too great, it causes huge problems on your batch testing, and huge problems on your packaging, because the packaging does not reflect accurately what that is. And all of these things are violations and issues, and people haven't been taught with cannabis to appreciate subtle diversity. They know left or right, but they don't understand a little left of a little right is still okay. And it's that's what I wanted that one. And they don't like the surprise. People get very spoiled through clonal cannabis and these monocrop systems. And it took away the desire for neat stuff. Like back in the day when you didn't control what your dealer sold you, you just got what he sold you, and a good dealer knew how to shop for good stuff, you were happy. But if you're not from that mind state and you want something specific and you don't give it to him specific, I call that stuff, like I said, pillow stuffing. It has no value unless you're going to blow it. And if you were going to blow it, you would have chosen higher biomass, higher percentage cannabinoids to be extracted. Otherwise, you're not making any money, you're going to go out of business. So I store seed from things that I like. But if I'm really, really obsessed with the cultivar that I really liked, I keep her or him with the seed. So I can back cross it or go back into it to try to accentuate the traits. Because sometimes, you know, you're talking one in a million, 1 in 20 million, who knows? You may never see that plant again the rest of your life. And I know people that are still hunting stock they lost in the 80s, still trying to chase that one. And I'm like, dude, you might not get it until you're 140. So if it's really unique, you have to hold it in clonal form. And then what I would rather see done is somehow preserve as much of it as possible in seed form so that you can vacuum that seed, you can put desiccants with it, you can hold it, and get it out of the location where the stuff is so that if you have a fire, we always wanted redundancy in operations because of raids, armed robberies, all the realities of real old school cannabis. And now, It's trying to be able to create the redundancy so that you're able to hold this material so that in the future when you have time, you can go back in time and get it. But we're in a clonal market in terms of replication. And once we get a better breeding process where we've worked an individual line to where you get an expression that's pretty damn consistent, you'll be able to do it.
I was going to add one thing to growing from seed and the regenerative movement, and that's some of the purest thinking regenerative farms are. They want to grow only from seed. Well, that's going to force them to go into the other market they're maybe holding back from, and that is extraction, to homogenize their batches. But I think there's going to have to be some sort of symbiotic relationship from that, and I really feel strongly about growing from seed. Through my entire history of farming or growing, when we were from pot growers to cannabis farmers, we've always had, we had our hoops of OG, that went right away, no worries, and then to offset that we had our crops of our heritage, our fruit, whatever you want to call it, and that was all from seed crop. The seed crop represented more than half of what we were doing, even though we were holding it down with the OG. In the long run, we would get more money for seed crop. And you might look at it as at the point of sale, you didn't, but when the books were balanced, we did. So you really want to look at how you're managing your farm, whether it's seed or clone, and we even gave back to the state one of our light BEP licenses, just because we want to downsize our farm from 2 helpers to 1 helper, and to do less pulling of covers and to work smarter and not harder.
Also, just to touch on that really quickly, we'll actually take our mothers the day that we harvest, because I want to see the full expression of that plant. So we'll actually clone it out the day of harvest. And we're working with, F16, F17. I'm still seeing diversity. I don't know if there is such a thing as congruency and exact replication in cannabis with seeds. It's just way too complex. Totally agree. But then the same as Kevin, we always keep a clone with the seed every time. And then we'll go and we'll take that clone, we'll grow it out, beautiful, healthy, it looks great, and take the seed from it. And it's always the seed from it that really represents that plant better, even than the clone ever could. But again, to be in the market, clones are really important. So when you're choosing your clones, you choose them for health, you choose them for well-being, so that you know that if you're going to pull off a whole greenhouse or a whole massive, room of all of those clones, you're putting a whole lot of eggs into one basket. So it's really important to know what clone you're running. Where did you get it from? Where did it come from? I'm seeing a tremendous amount of pathogens. In fact, I have yet to go into a Canadian grow room that doesn't have a broadlight. Yet. And this is something that California has been really hip to. They've been dealing with it for about 7 years, maybe even 8. And Canada's really got to start getting with it, get a scope, figure out what's going on, because what we're doing is we keep passing back and forth bad genetics, and when you've got a seed, at least you know that it's somewhat clean. So yeah, if you want to grow a clone and you want to give it out to the world, start with the seed so that you know that it's clean.
I think we should turn it back to Josh. We've got 3 other folks that are going to be speaking.
Yeah, we can get some more questions later.
Oh, we're going off a bit.
Yeah, I know, no, it's so good, dude. We could listen to you for
we got smoke,
like we did the other night. Thank you guys so much. I want to take time for these other guys, but let's take a break here real quick. But see here, I put up a seed swap on there. Yeah. That was so you would all see it on the internet and bring seeds. So raise your hand if you want to sell, buy, trade seeds, and look at those people, look around. This is the time to do it. There's no formal thing happening here. So meet up in here. Let's take a 45-minute break. Let's start up at 3. Let's take an hour break, get some lunch, smoke, swap some seeds. We'll feel good to come in the next session. All right, guys. Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, guys, gonna go ahead and load this up.